Scotty Jorgensen had never felt like this before. She'd been drunk a couple times, but never stoned. Unlike being drunk, this sensation was more calm, relaxed. She felt like everything around her was in soft focus, and she was on the verge of giggling. Though no one told jokes, almost everything she heard seemed to be hysterical. The 18-year-old redheaded girl took a drag on a joint handed to her by her date Joey Fasano, while the couple and 5 other couples sat around a campfire hours after the prom they attended. The dozen teens attended the prom and then changed clothes to spend the evening sitting in a makeshift campsite, drinking, getting high, and possibly having sex in one of the tents set up by the pond in the backyard of the Travers' old house. Scotty was nervous and excited about the possibility of losing her virginity, especially with her handsome beau, a sturdily built young man with dark brown hair, blue eyes, and dimples. She'd been more than surprised when Joey, firmly ensconced in the cool company of Harry Truman High School, had invited her, on her best days a second or third tier student, to prom. Scotty knew who she was and what she looked like. She was considered pretty but not beautiful, with green eyes, medium-sized breasts, and nice legs, and her thick, wavy red hair hung a couple inches below her shoulders. She wasn't sure if Joey was the one who asked her to prom, but she wasn't about to pass up the chance to go to the social event of her high school year with the handsome man. Her best friend Wanda had warned her that Joey only wanted her virginity, but Scotty wasn't sure she wanted to keep it intact anymore. After all, she was 18, and most girls her age had already had sexual experience, and a handsome man like Joey would be her first, and she'd remember it for the rest of her life, she told her friend. The Travers homestead was old. The house by the road had been built in the early 1920s, but by 1970 it had been abandoned for at least half a dozen years. Teenagers often made their way to the pond behind the house for impromptu parties, because the house and the woods behind it made the place almost invisible from the road. Scotty sipped her Budweiser and took a drag on the joints as they were passed around. She replayed the events of prom night in her head. Joey had looked so handsome in his powder blue tuxedo, and she thought she looked beautiful in her navy blue dress. The evening had been fantastic, magical, she thought. She hoped the rest of the night would be magical too. She and her parents had agreed that her curfew would be at 3 in the morning. Scotty got up from her seat and headed toward the spot in the woods that the girls used as a restroom. She shook her head, trying to chase the fog away. She veered slightly off the path the other girls were using and didn't notice the large puddle until she was knee-deep in it. She shrieked and fell forward, hitting her head on a small tree and plunging into another puddle. Feeling the warmth of the water, she sank into a cozy sleep from which she would never awaken. Arnold Dusty Dustwitch was crushed. The girl of his dreams, Tori Jan, had just turned down his invitation to the upcoming prom. "You're a great guy, Dusty, but I don't like you. You're a friend, but nothing more than that. I don't want you spending that kind of money on me if we're just friends," Tori said. "Thanks for being honest with me, Tori," Dusty said. "I can't say I'm not disappointed, but I appreciate the honesty." Dusty sighed heavily and slowly walked away with his head down. Tori knew she had done the right thing by being honest, but she also knew that she had probably just lost a good friend. Dusty had been working up the courage to ask Tori to prom for a month. He knew she was out of his league, but if he was going to spend the kind of money that guys usually spent on prom and the whole weekend, he wanted to ask the girl he thought was his best choice. Tori was not only beautiful, but she had a graceful body, bright blue eyes, and was a good friend. There may have been prettier girls, but not for him. "Ooh, I can see in your face that she said no," Dusty's best friend Gary Scatini said a few minutes later in the cafeteria during a lunch break. "But there's still time to ask someone else. I'm sure there are plenty of girls who would like to go to prom with you." "No, I'm not going," Dusty said. "I've already been turned down by the only girl I really want to go with. I don't have a plan B." "Don't be like that, Dusty." A couple weeks later, Gary grabbed Dusty's hand in the hallway between classes at Truman Middle School and carried him to an empty seat. "Hey, Joanna Gurney really wants to go to prom, but she doesn't have a date," Gary said quietly. "Opportunity knocks, my friend. All you have to do is turn the doorknob and walk into the room." Dusty knew Joanna well and considered her his friend. They had been in several classes together throughout their high school years. She was a pretty blonde with large breasts and somewhat discriminating taste. She hadn't had a boyfriend in months. "I like Joanna. I like her a lot. She's a wonderful person. If I just wanted to go to prom, she would probably be a pretty good date. But I asked the only girl I wanted to go with, Dusty said. Big mistake, Dustman, Gary said. You know prom is the biggest moment for teenage girls. There are plenty of guys who would line up for a chance with Joanna. Dusty had to admit to himself that he hadn't thought through the whole scenario. Losing his virginity to Joanna would change his life. He really thought about it for a few days before he decided that keeping his integrity was worth more than losing his virginity. A week later, as Dusty was stacking his textbooks in his locker to finish his day, Susie McGuire stopped and asked if he had a minute. He answered in the affirmative. Dusty, you know Joanna and you like her. You'd be doing her a favor if you asked her to the prom, Susie said. I understand, Suze, I really do. But I asked the one person I wanted to go with and she turned me down. And I don't feel like going with anyone else. It's simple, Dusty said. You know, someday you're going to regret not going to your graduation, Susie said. And you could have done something good here, but you'll just miss it too. Dusty's close friends spent the weeks before graduation trying to convince him that he should go. He continued to resist until it was too late to make plans. One evening, an unexpected guest came to his house. Joanna Gurney's mother was sitting in the living room with Dusty's mother when the young man came in from mowing the yard late one night after school. Dusty knew that his mother and Donna Gurney were friends, but having them sit in the Dust Witch's living room drinking tea was not a common occurrence. Dusty, come in for a minute, his mother said as he entered the house from the garage. Being the dutiful son he was, Dusty entered the living room and greeted both women. Dusty, we've got a little situation here, and I think you might be able to help us and get something out of it yourself, his mother said. Mrs. Gurney would like to ask you for a favor of sorts. Donna Gurney was still a beautiful woman in her 40s. Dusty briefly remembered the old adage that says, if you want to know what a woman will look like in 20 years, look at her mother. He figured that whoever married Joanna Gurney would still be pleased with the way she looked in the future. Dusty, Joanna is very upset that she will miss her prom. It's every girl's dream to go to prom, to dress up for the most important night of her high school career. But for some reason, no one invited Joanna. She hasn't had a boyfriend since she broke up with Bobby Petrillo a few months ago. I know you and Joanna are friends. Could you take Joanna to the prom? Just as friends, as a favor for me? She deserves a special night, and I know you're a good guy and will treat her right. Her father and I will pay all the expenses for this evening. You don't have to do that, Donna, Dusty's mother intervened. We'll gladly pay for Dusty to go to the prom. Dusty noticed that Donna Gurney had tears in her eyes. Ellen Dustwitch was one step away from that. He lowered his gaze to the floor for a second to gather his thoughts. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gurney, but I can't take Joanna. I only asked for one girl. I only wanted to take one girl and she turned me down, Dusty said. Joanna is a wonderful girl, but she deserves to be picked first. She may be hurting right now, but I don't want to be the guy she'll chase away in 20 years because he wasn't the beau of her dreams for that night. Think about it, both of you. You know I'm right? Dusty, his mother began, but quickly stopped with a look on his face. I guess you're right, Dusty. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, Mrs. Gurney replied. Dusty felt somewhat guilty for lying to his parents for one of the few times in his life, saying he was going camping with friends who weren't going to the ball that evening. He was actually going camping, but alone. He packed his small tent, camping supplies, food and drinks in the trunk of his car, and hit the road about an hour before his friends would head to the restaurant to start prom night. Dusty decided to go to one of the usual campgrounds, but ended up driving around the neighborhood for a long time until he came across Traverse's old place, a lot on the north side of town, long abandoned and heavily overgrown. He knew that people had once lived in the house, but after the owners died, it had remained abandoned and untouched for years, and in the 1970s and 1980s, the lot had been used as a teenage brothel. There was a pond at the back of the property, and in the early 1970s, a teenager died near it, the story said. The story was that a group of teenagers were partying after prom, when one of the girls, too stoned for her own good, got lost, fell into a large puddle and drowned. For the next 20 years, the place became something of an urban legend, scary story, and then fell into complete disrepair and neglect. Everyone thought that someday it would be bought and razed to the ground by some big company that wanted to build some kind of industrial plant here. The desolation of the place pleased Dusty in his present mood, and he pulled a flashlight from the trunk, along with his tent and supplies. He walked for a while, stumbling along until he reached the spot where the pond was. He pitched his tent about 30 yards from the pond, took a can of Coke out of his backpack, and sat down to ponder the meaning of life. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Came a voice from somewhere behind him, waking him from either slumber or unconsciousness. He wasn't sure. He grabbed his flashlight and turned at the sound, his heart pounding. Truth be told, the voice startled him badly. Who are you?" Dusty stuttered as he saw a young woman walking toward him, dressed in bell-bottom jeans and a light blue halter, looking 1970s, Dusty thought, despite his fear. She held her hand in front of her eyes to shield herself from the light shining directly into her face. He chuckled nervously, then lowered the light to her stomach. "I'm Scotty Jorgensen," the young woman said with a cheerful relish in her voice. Dusty looked at the woman carefully. "Where did you come from? You really scared me," muttered Dusty. The girl giggled, and Dusty seemed to like the sound. "I came from over there," Scotty said, pointing to a spot a few yards away. Dusty frowned, deciding the woman was avoiding his question. "Where do you live? Where do you go to school? I've never seen you before," Dusty claimed. The young woman sat down on the grass a foot away from Dusty, gathering her long red hair into a bundle and sliding it down her back. She made a grimace. "I live nearby. I go to the local high school," she said quickly, hoping the young man would agree with the answer. "Nope. You may live around here somewhere, but you don't go to Truman." "I'd remember seeing you before," he replied. Dusty saw the young woman smile at his compliment. "Well, I went to the local school," she sighed when Dusty raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "Before? When?" he asked sharply. A long time ago," she said slowly and quietly. "Why all the questions, Columbo?" "Colam. Who?" he asked, not realizing she was referring to a 70s detective TV program. Dusty couldn't interpret the look the woman gave him. "What year is it?" she asked innocently. "Wow. How tall are you, Miss Scotty Jorgensen?" The woman cast another unreadable glance at him, then sighed, then frowned. "How do you know? I was high, but not anymore," she said. "And you haven't for a long time." Dusty wrinkled his nose as if he smelled something unpleasant. "You're cute, but you don't make any sense, Scotty," he said. "What year is it?" "Please answer me," she wheezed in a frustrated tone. "Okay, he'll play along. It's 2022, May 16th to be exact," he announced. Tears came to the woman's eyes. A few drops fell on her cheeks. "This is going to sound very strange, I'm sure, but the last time I was here before today was May 14th, 1971. Yep, been away for 51 years, she whispered. Dusty's face contorted into a mask of confusion and then recognition. "Wait, you mean," he asked, "impossible?" Scotty wrapped her arms around herself and began to sway, looking more like a 5-year-old than a teenager at this point. "I was trying to find a good place to. I slipped and fell into a puddle. The water was warm. I closed my eyes for a second," she whispered emotionlessly. "May 14th, 1971, Dusty said. "You, that girl, who died here all those years ago. That can't be right." Dusty reached out and placed his hand on the woman's shoulder. He touched her twice and shook his head. "You're not dead. You're here. You're as solid as I am," he said. Scotty looked at him with a questioning look. She tapped her right hand on her left arm, her face and head. "I feel real. I can't be dead," she said. "But, yeah, but," repeated Dusty. The young man's eyes lit up as he pondered the answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He tapped the phone a few times and began to read. His eyes got even bigger when he read the obituary of Scotty Jorgensen. Finished, he calmly handed the phone to the woman. She looked at it as if it were a snake. He realized that if the woman thought she was from the 1970s, she had no idea what a cell phone was. He took the phone back and started reading the obituary aloud. Tears dripped from her eyes as Dusty read. When he finished, she was sobbing. Whoever this woman was, her heartache was real, and he sympathized deeply with her. He looked at the picture on his phone again, and then at the woman. He had to admit that the picture matched the woman. He pulled himself close to the woman and held her against him as she cried. It was several minutes before she finally stopped. "I can't explain it, but you're here in my arms alive just like me," Dusty said. "I feel alive, but I think I know what's best. I don't understand," Scotty said. They sat together for a few more minutes before she spoke again. "Why are you here in this place?" she asked. "It's prom night," he replied. I didn't have a date. The girl I asked out turned me down. I could have gone with someone else, but I didn't want to. I guess I just wanted to be alone tonight. To wallow in self-pity for a while. Prom night, of course. It was prom night for me too when… The silence between them was deafening. Why don't you tell me about it, Scotty? He said softly. For the next few minutes, Scotty told her story in a whisper. She hesitated several times before finally admitting to Dusty that she had been a virgin when she… Tonight might have been my first time, Dusty replied. If I'd taken another girl, I'm sure she would have given in to me. I really thought about it a lot, but in the end I didn't want my first time to be just that. Wow, a teenager who doesn't think with his crotch. I am in the presence of a unicorn, Scotty said. Dusty noticed goosebumps starting to appear on Scotty's shoulders and arms. If you don't mind, I can unzip the sleeping bag and wrap it around us so it'll be a little warmer. I also have a couple Coca-Colas and a big bag of pretzels. I really wasn't planning on meeting anyone today. Well, you know, it's a wallow, Dusty said. Scotty smiled and nodded, and Dusty was blown away and very embarrassed. As they sat and talked, Dusty watched mesmerized as the woman took a sip of her Coke and ate another pretzel. Finally, she realized what he was doing. Yeah, I know it's weird, Scotty said. Everything tastes the same as it always has. I was cold and now I'm warm when we snuggle up with the sleeping bag. Here, touch my hand. I'm warm. It's as if I never ever left. The conversation became more and more sparse as the evening went on. Dusty noticed that the woman was tired and put his arm around her shoulders. After a few minutes, he felt her breathing even out and she drifted into sleep. He loved the feel of her body next to his as they snuggled against each other, and before he knew it, he was asleep too. When Dusty woke up alone, it was already light. He was lying wrapped up in his sleeping bag. He reached for Scotty, but she was gone. He made sure of it when he opened his eyes. Dusty took down the tent and tidied up the camp. He wondered if he should take the Coke can Scotty had been drinking out of and check it for fingerprints and DNA, like he'd seen on the few TV shows he'd watched. He talked himself out of it, realizing that there was no way he could explain what he'd experienced the previous night. Damn, she was so real in my arms, he said aloud, addressing no one in particular. Dusty worked 6-hour shifts at the local grocery store as a stock boy. This job was a way for him to earn money for expenses. He was the only high school student working, since the other high school students working at the store were gone for the weekend for graduation. Hey, loser boy, what did you do last night? Play pocket pool while all the other seniors were fucking their prom dates, yelled Billy Rayburn, another stalker who was a junior, when Dusty threw a fist punch. Bite me, pizza, Dusty replied to the boy whose skin was constantly giving him trouble. Billy grumbled but didn't snap at Dusty, knowing the man had a sharp and quick tongue. Dusty liked the fact that his job was easy and he could think about almost anything while he completed his assignments. On this day, his thoughts were occupied with Scotty Jorgensen, or whoever she was. Before heading to work, he'd spent an hour on the internet, researching information about the girl and her parents. Nothing that Scotty had told him the night before was any different from what he had read. In fact, her story was much more detailed. He planned to return to the Traverses' old establishment after work, though truth be told, he didn't expect Scotty, or whoever she was, would show up again. He'd take a pizza with him just in case, though. At sunset, Dusty dragged his things to the same spot as the day before. He didn't see any signs of strangers in the vicinity. The sun was just about to set when he opened the pizza box and pulled out the first slice. He had already eaten 3 slices when he heard someone walking toward him. He turned around and was overjoyed to see a young woman, Scotty, walking towards him. You seem glad to see me, she said, sitting down on the ground next to him. He lifted the top of the pizza box and pointed to it. She smiled broadly, took a slice, and took a bite. Oh, this is so delicious, she enthused, closing her eyes as she chewed. Tony's? Dusty chuckled. Tony's has been gone since before I was born, Scotty. My parents told me about Tony's. According to them, it's the best pizza ever. It's from Roberto Nocella's. I wouldn't bring you a fake pizza. I don't want you to think I'm an idiot, he said. She smiled as she took a bite of her pizza and her green eyes lit up. So, can you try the pizza? He asked uncertainly. Well, yes, she answered quickly. Why don't I try? She stopped half speaking, realizing what she was about to say. Dusty stared at her in silence. Wow, that's pretty far away, she finally said. AITA, but not me. You can see me and talk to me, and I can taste the pizza. I don't get it, but I guess being here is better than not being here. Well, where were you before I got here? Where did you come from? Asked Dusty. Scotty looked confused. Her mind was racing with thoughts, but Dusty could see that she wasn't getting any answers. I haven't been anywhere, she replied. I came over there. She pointed to a spot a few feet away from where the two were sitting. I was just there. All of a sudden I was there. Damn it, if I can explain it. Anything, she said. I remember meeting you last night, and the last thing I remember before that was after prom. I remember everything before that, school, parents, friends, everything. But there's nothing between when I fell in the puddle and last night. You told me yesterday that I've been gone for 51 years, but none of it makes sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me either, Scotty, Dusty said. According to my phone, you drowned 51 years ago, but here you are. And you're eating pizza. I'd be scared, if I wasn't so scared. No, don't be afraid of me, Dusty. Please. You're the first person I've talked to in a long time. Don't leave me now, she said. Hey, I may be intimidated, but I have to say I don't often spend Saturday nights alone with a beautiful girl eating pizza. I'm not going to leave, trust me. My dad told me you can't trust boys who say trust me, she remarked and lowered her head. My dad, my mom, what happened to them? Do you know? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. Dusty hesitated. He knew where this would lead. He knew what Scotty's parents' names were, having read her mother's obituary the day before. He typed the obituaries of both of them in turn into Google and read the information to her. He saw tears come to her eyes. She tried her best not to let those tears out. I have so many questions, but the first one is about that little box you keep looking at. What is that thing? She asked. Dusty pondered her comment for a few seconds, then laughed out loud. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and held it in front of the two of them. He then spent 10 minutes telling Scotty the story of the transition from the Princess phone to his iPhone, distracted by explanations about computers. Get out of here, she shouted. This is just Rod Serling's madness. Who, or what, Rod Serling is crazy? He grinned. Twilight Zone, Night Gallery, science fiction, horror movies, futuristic shit, she laughed back, enjoying Dusty's discomfort. Okay, here is a simple question. What happened in Vietnam? If it's been 51 years, then we're still fighting there, aren't we? We lost it, sort of. No, we're not continuing to fight there, he said. What happened to the Beatles after the breakup? She asked as soon as he finished answering her first question. Well, they all had pretty good solo careers, but John Lennon was shot in 1980, and George Harrison died of cancer in 2001. I can show you some of their performances on my phone. Here, watch this. This thing also plays music. You can read obituaries and history. You can play music and little movies. And you can make phone calls? She asked. They finished their pizza and sat together talking for a few more hours until Dusty noticed that Scotty was starting to turn in. I'm not sure what the protocol is here, babe, Dusty said. I usually offer to drive you home. Maybe we can just sit in your car, she said. They got up and sat in the back seat of Dusty's car. He covered them both with a blanket. They talked for a few more minutes before Scotty dozed off. Dusty watched her for a few more minutes before he too fell asleep. When he awoke, he was alone again, though he didn't feel or hear her get out of the car. On Sunday afternoon, Dusty met up with a few of his close friends at Gary Scatina's house where they watched a baseball game. Eventually, the conversation turned to prom and the events of the weekend. The other 4 boys went to prom and the weekend was spent at restaurants and plays. 3 of Dusty's friends revealed that they had intimate relationships with their dates during the weekend. The friend who had no such experience ended up fighting with his date twice over the weekend, and they eventually broke up after dating for 3 months. 2 of the other 3 friends rated the weekend as excellent, while the third said it was just fine, even considering the intimacy. Dusty sat quietly listening to his friends, feeling like an outsider for not going to the prom. After a few minutes, the difference was pointed out to him the way teenage boys usually do, by teasing and playfully insulting. Well done. Had a good weekend with your right-hand man? Ralph Gibbs grinned and the others laughed. Dusty briefly considered telling his friends about meeting the new girl, but then realized he shouldn't do that, since there was so much he couldn't explain. That's very funny. You know I'm left-handed, he quipped back. You should have taken Joanna. That's all I can say, Gary Scatini teased. After dinner with his parents, Dusty contemplated not going to Old Man Travers' house for all of 30 seconds. He didn't want to miss the opportunity to spend time with Scotty, even if things didn't add up in his head. Dusty gathered snacks and drinks from the kitchen again and headed for the Travers house as the sun was already setting. In 2 days, he already knew that Scotty wouldn't show up until it was dark and that she liked snacks. "Hey, handsome, around again?" said Scotty, walking over to Dusty, who was sitting playing a video game on his phone. "Hello, redhead," the young man enthused, referring to her bushy, long red hair. "So, did your friends have a good weekend?" asked Scotty, sitting down. "Oh, good and plenty. I like them." "I think 2 of the 4 were definite. 1 was a definite maybe, and 1 was definitely not," Dusty said. "Do you regret not going?" she asked before putting a few pieces of candy in her mouth. "Actually, no. If I had gone, I wouldn't have met you," he said. The woman smiled, leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. He noted that she tasted like candy licorice, but she also had a light perfume scent. That was nice. Do you wear perfume?" he asked. Scotty smiled broadly. "I haven't worn anything since I got here, but I wore white shoulders to the prom," she said. Dusty leaned into the woman, inhaled deeply, and then kissed her back harder than she kissed him. The clothes were gone when Dusty stood up, took Scotty's hand and led her to the back seat of his car. "I'm sorry, I should have brought my tent with me," he whispered. "I didn't think—" "Shut up," Scotty whispered back, pressing her lips to his. He threw a blanket over them both. The couple had just finished making love for the second time. Scotty lay stretched out on Dusty's body and chuckled softly. His arms wrapped around her body and his left hand squeezed her soft, slightly muscular left cheek. Then he realized that she was no longer giggling but quietly crying. "Thanks, Dusty. It was supposed to happen that night. Thanks for making me a woman," she snorted. "I guess you could say I've been waiting a long time for the right boy." The pair kissed gently and then repeated the kiss with more force. "Thank you for the privilege of letting me be my first," Dusty said, "and for being my first." Dusty realized that they had been doing this for some time. Picking up his phone from the floor of the back seat, he found that it was 11:52. "Oh shit, I've got to go. I'll be late for curfew, and I've got school tomorrow," he announced and immediately stopped. "Scotty, where do you want me to? Take you?" he asked. "I can't just leave you here." "Well, first I think we need to get dressed," she laughed. "And then you just need to leave. This is where I belong. It'll be fine. I can't leave the grounds and no one but you can see me. Or hearing you, touching you, or make love to you." "Yes," she whispered with a shy smile. Dusty hadn't expected such a question when his mother asked it during family dinner the following Friday night. "So who is this girl you've been spending every night with for the last week, Arnold?" his mother asked. Dusty choked on his food. His father grinned. "Yeah, the FBI has nothing on your mother," Bill Dustwich said to his son, and a smirk appeared on his face. "How do you know I'm dating a girl?" asked Dusty to his mother. "Oh, please, Arnold. You've been grinning like the village idiot since you got back from camping last weekend. It's got to be a girl. The last time you grinned like that was when you had a crush on Susan Mason in kindergarten." "Mom, that was kindergarten. It was a dozen years ago," Dusty said, blushing with embarrassment. "So who is she? Who are her parents? Do we know them?" asked Ellen Dustwich quickly. Dusty knew he couldn't answer his mother's questions without triggering more questions. "Her name is Scotty. She's from North Amaro, just across town. You don't know her parents," Dusty lied, getting up from the table to carry his used plate into the kitchen. "You know, you could bring her to us sometime so we can meet her," his mother exclaimed as he started up the stairs to his bedroom. "Yeah, like it's going to happen anytime soon," his father told his mother. "Hey, my mom wants to meet my new girlfriend," Dusty Scotty said that night at the old Travers Manor. "So I'm your new girlfriend now?" asked Scotty in response. "Wait, oh, please don't tell me you told your parents about our intimacy." Scotty's eyes filled with tears and his face took on an expression of horror. "No, baby, I'm close to my parents, but I would never do that." "Never," Dusty replied. They talked and shared snacks and then moved to Dusty's tent to spend more time together. Scotty thanked Dusty for bringing the tent and extra blankets. "Not for me. No one but you can see me, but everyone could see you." "That wouldn't be good," he said, blushing. "Where do you go when we're not together?" asked Dusty after a moment's silence. They pressed against each other, the young man's right arm around the girl's body and her head resting on his chest. He felt her head move and moved slightly to look into her green eyes. "Aya, I don't go anywhere, I guess," she replied, as if into the void. "As far as I can tell, I don't exist anywhere unless I'm with you." "You know, I've been feeling the same way for a week now," he replied. She smiled brightly. Her green eyes made the young man's heart race, from the very first time they had sex every day. "So you're not going to stick around and wait for me if I don't show up?" inquired Dusty. A hurt expression appeared on Scotty's face. Dusty knew at once what she was thinking. "It's not what you think, babe," Dusty said quickly. "I play on the softball team and we play twice a week, starting next week and going through September. The games are in the evening, so I won't be coming in on those days." "Oh, okay. You need to do stuff like that. You can't hang around with a dead man, with me, every day. You have a life to live, and you need to do it. I understand," she said. Dusty suddenly realized Scotty's reluctance. He felt uneasy. "Yeah, I can quit the team. That's what I'll do," he said. It was Scotty's turn to understand. "No, you need to play ball with the guys," she said. "I don't want to be called a clingy girl. I wouldn't have been that kind of girl in those days. This time, they both smiled. Dusty spent 5 of the 7 days a week at the Traverses' old house and slept there Friday and Saturday nights. Both he and Scotty enjoyed falling asleep in each other's arms on the weekends, though he was always sad to wake up alone in the mornings. He knew he had fallen in love with this woman, despite all the problems she caused. On a hot July Saturday morning, Dusty had just finished mowing the 5-acre yard owned by his uncle, Kingston Rainier. He'd been mowing that lot for extra income since his uncle and his wife had moved into a house on the outskirts of town 2 years ago. Uncle King had married the beautiful Ray Ann and moved into this house a few years after his divorce from Aunt Tracy. "Hey, kid, how do you like tricks?" said King to the young man, handing him a can of Pepsi and opening his own. They talked for a few minutes, sipping refreshments. Dusty was King's favorite nephew, and he tried to keep in touch with him regularly. "Do you have a girlfriend, Dusty?" Dusty blushed every time his uncle asked that question, which happened every time they saw each other. But on one of the few occasions, Dusty was able to answer it in the affirmative. "Yeah, sort of," the teen said. "Let me see," King said, reaching over to Dusty's phone. "You kids live these things. Pictures, buddy." "I don't have any pictures, Uncle King," Dusty said, realizing he could never tell his uncle the truth about Scotty not being in any pictures. "Oh, come on. Selfies? Anything?" said King. "She's very camera shy. Every time I pick up my phone to take a picture, she threatens to cut me off." "Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to do that," Dusty said. "It's okay, kid. I got it. You're careful, right?" said King. Yeah, sure," Dusty said quickly. "Hey, wait a minute. I have something to give you," King said. King entered the house and came out a few minutes later carrying a long, thin box. He held it out to the young man and nodded. Dusty opened the box and saw a greenish egg-shaped stone set in gold with a gold chain attached. "Someday when you find the right girl, give her this," King said. "Wow, I can't just take this," Dusty said. "It looks expensive. Why didn't you give it to Ray Ann?" King looked uncomfortable. "I could never give it to Ray Ann," he explained. "I made it especially for Tracy for our 20th anniversary. Just before she told me she wanted a divorce, I just threw it in a drawer. And it sat there for years. It's a beautiful thing, don't you think? But I could never give it to anyone in my family. I hope the woman you give it to will be the love of your life." "Thank you, Uncle King." 2 weeks later, Dusty and Scotty lay pressed against each other after what Scotty thought was an amazing night of sex. Dusty's face was covered in woman's juices, and he was smiling broadly. "Where did you learn that?" asked Scotty. "Who taught you that?" "Don't worry, baby, no one taught me that. I did a little reading and decided that you deserve something special," he said proudly. "Special, huh? I call that awesome." Scotty squirmed and kissed Dusty hard on the lips. "I love you, baby," he said softly. Scotty burst into tears, and Dusty pulled her tighter against him. "I love you too," she said quietly between sobs. I... Dusty kissed her passionately. "It's okay, baby, I got it. Kind of. Not really, I guess." The following Friday night, Dusty had a different kind of surprise for Scotty. After taking off her clothes, Dusty climbed under the blanket in the tent and held out the gift bag to Scotty. She immediately burst into tears. "Oh my God, Dusty! You didn't have to give me anything," she wailed. "You gave me so much just by being by my side day after day." Dusty hugged the naked woman. "Yes, it is, baby," he said, smiling broadly. Scotty cried even harder when she unwrapped the gift and discovered the necklace. "It's beautiful, Dusty. You can't give it to me," she said. "You have to keep it and give it to someone." "You are the man, baby," Dusty replied. "It was given to me by my uncle, who said I should give it to the love of my life. That's you, Scotty." The woman cried for a few more minutes. Finally, Dusty kissed her, took the necklace, undid it, and put it around her neck. Once it was fastened, he turned her around to face him so that she was wearing nothing but the gift. "It's perfect. It even matches your eyes," he enthuses. "I'll have to take your word for it as I have no reflection and don't appear in photos," she said. They kissed passionately. Dusty was standing at their usual meeting place at the Travers house when Scotty appeared. They greeted each other with the usual passionate kiss, followed by a bone-chilling embrace. They'd spent so much time together over the past 2 months that the woman had no trouble realizing that something was bothering her boyfriend deeply. "What's the matter, kid? Talk to me, Dusty," Scotty said. Dusty handed Scotty a Coke. Distracted for a moment, he smiled as she took a sip. He always enjoyed the way Scotty liked a soft drink, even though she was. "I've decided not to go to college at Purdue University in a couple weeks, Scotty," he said, looking into the girl's eyes. "I don't want to leave you, but I can't do that. What if you're not here when I get back?" Scotty stares at him in amazement, actually choking on a sip of Coke. "You can't do this, Dusty. You can't give up your whole life, your future for me," she said in a hoarse voice. "I don't know how long I have left to live here. I don't know anything. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why you see me, feel me, and all that. I don't even know if I'll be here tomorrow. You can't change your whole life for me. And even if I knew I could stay here forever, like that, it wouldn't be the way to live your life. Stuck here for hours every night. You have your whole life ahead of you. You need a real flesh and blood woman." "Oh, you're flesh and blood, Scotty, at least to me and to me. I don't know what you think we've been doing, but it's definitely flesh and blood," Dusty said. The woman blushed modestly, then smiled, then frowned. "Yes, of flesh and blood," she whispered timidly. "But we can never be anything more than we are now, even if it lasts a long time. I love you, Dusty. I want you to have everything you want for yourself. Remember, we talked about this. You want to work at NASA, marry a good woman, have 2, maybe 3 kids? I can't be a part of any of that, ever, no matter how much I love you and you love me. I don't know what I did to deserve that extra time, but I am more than grateful for it and for what you have given me during this time. Please go on to your future. Just remember me from time to time. They say you always remember your first. I can never forget you, Scotty, even if you aren't my first," he said before leaning down and kissing the woman passionately. It didn't seem possible to Dusty, but spending the last 2 weeks with Scotty before he left for college had brought them even closer. "I can't even imagine not being able to see you again," he said as they sat eating their favorite pepperoni pizza. "If only we had met at another time and place. But we'd never meet, at least like this, if it hadn't been for me," the woman said. "I'd be 69 now, an old woman. I don't understand it, but it gave me a part of life I never had of a boyfriend. Sex, love, and now a broken heart. I know you have to go, and I told you to go, but it hurts so much. I think I understand now how my parents felt when Twice a night they made slow, tender, and passionate love in the missionary position, which Scotty called old man love. They kissed a lot while they were engaged. Perhaps we should do this more often. It's really nice," she purred at one point. They tried to stay awake longer than usual, but sleep wouldn't come. She kissed him hard on the lips and whispered, "I'll try to find you." And they both drifted into sleep with smiles on their faces. A few hours later, Dusty woke up alone in his tent as usual, but he knew that the ordinary in his world hadn't existed in months. He wondered if it would ever be again. It was several minutes before he stopped crying. Dusty was the most normal freshman at Purdue, unless you counted his major in aeronautical engineering. These students were, for the most part, a little more serious, a little more studious, and, yes, a little more nerdy. Not that Dusty hadn't been categorized as a nerd before. At 6, 1 tall, 170 pounds, long curly brown hair and brown eyes, Dusty was quite handsome, though a bit thin. He would admit to being a little behind in social skills, though after a summer spent with Scotty, his sexual skills could be considered above average. Before he left his hometown, Scotty advised him to go on a date to Purdue to get over her. You have a lot to offer a girl, Dusty, both in and out of bed. Don't deny yourself a full life. We've had a great time, but it's time for you to move on and live, Scotty said on their last night together. Despite Scotty's entreaties, Dusty wasn't ready to move on. He never approached the first girl at Purdue his freshman year, although several showed interest in him. Hey, how about that? Asked Dusty's neighbor one night in the dining room. That tall blonde has been watching you for the last 10 minutes. Go say hi, take her number. She's hot. You gotta let the native cutie go, bro. Dusty had to admit that the blonde was definitely sexy, but then guilt overwhelmed him. He and Scotty had only been broken up for a couple months. I can't, Johnny. I'll feel like I'm cheating on her, Dusty said softly. I think you're crazy, kid, but whatever. Okay, if I ask her out? His roommate asked him. Go ahead, good luck, he replied. Dusty didn't get home until Thanksgiving. He was happy to see his parents and especially happy to be eating good food again. Although he tried not to think about her, Scotty had been on his mind throughout dinner, and his parents might have noticed that he was a little distracted. Looking forward to meeting a girl we still haven't met? His mom asked with more than a touch of sarcasm in her voice. Dusty wasn't sure what he was expecting. Knots knotted in his stomach. I don't think so, he lied. She was going somewhere else too, and we knew a long-distance relationship wouldn't accomplish anything. We'll probably just see if any of the guys are home during the break. Yeah, you always get so nervous when you see guys, his mom remarked, raising her eyebrows. Dusty threw a couple of blankets, a carton of Coca-Cola, and some snacks into the back seat of the car as the sun was already setting. He felt like he was suffocating as he drove toward the Traverses' old house. It seemed to Dusty that no one had shown up at their place since the night he'd left for school. The sun had already set. Dusty wandered around looking around, hoping to see. He caught the moonlight on the gold-wrapped necklace as it dangled from the branch of a small maple tree. He didn't know whether to be happy or sad to see the necklace. He just knew that the necklace had been on Scotty the moment they'd gotten their privacy. Dusty alternately walked around the spot by the Travers house and sat in the car, playing on his phone and reading the news. Midnight came and went, and so did 1, 2, 3, and 4 o'clock in the morning. He woke up, wrapped in a blanket, around 7:15. Dawn came a few minutes later. Scotty was still nowhere to be seen. He took the necklace off the tree and put it in his pocket. For the next 2 nights, Dusty drove back to the Travers house and slept in a sleeping bag in the back seat of his car, waiting for Scotty to no avail. He knew the possibility always existed, but that didn't make it any easier. Dusty and Johnny were sitting in the back of the social room of a fraternity house at Purdue in late February, enjoying the loud music from the speakers and watching the dancing during a midwinter party. Dusty was there as a guest of his roommate, who had joined the fraternity his first semester. You have it written all over your face that you've been a stalker since freshman year, said a pretty blonde woman standing to his left, drinking a glass of wine. Dusty pointed a finger at himself and asked, Me? Are you talking to me? Yes, that's me, De Niro. That was pretty good, by the way, she remarked. What makes you think I'm stalking a freshman girl? Dusty replied with an amused expression on his face, trying hard not to give the appearance that he was scrutinizing the woman from head to toe. First of all, you don't drink, which tells me you're not 21 yet, she replied. Then you have this thing of, I really can't grow a beard, but I'm too lazy to shave, and you don't realize that there's a huge difference between a cool, unshaven look and a lazy, unshaven look. And then you also drool on your chin when you watch women dance. The woman's blue eyes practically glowed with amusement as he stared at her with his mouth open. Well, I have to admit that you're right on the first 2 points, but it hasn't been that long since I've had a better-looking woman than most in my arms. But you could have confused me with that loser freshman who's really drooling, Dusty said, pointing at his roommate. Now it's my turn. You're a psychology major, a senior, a bit of a smartass, and you're bored to tears, or you'd never talk to a freshman, and you're someone on campus. I should recognize you, but I don't. That's because I'm wearing all my clothes, she said, and burst into laughter when Dusty opened his mouth again. You might recognize me if I was wearing a cheerleading uniform. To most people, I'm the third cheerleader from the right when we're all lined up. And yes, I'm a junior and more than a little smart. I'm Dusty. Dusty Dustwitch, the young man said. Dusty, huh? That tells me that your parents gave you a terrible name. Probably something like Arnold, the girl laughed. Dusty bashfully lowered his head and blushed. Oh, I'm sorry, that's it, isn't it? Yes, he whispered. My name is KC, by the way, she said. And before you guess, it's letters. It's short for Catherine Charlene Gardner. It's a little better than Arnold. Do you want to go somewhere a little quieter, just to talk? He asked. The young woman nodded, then took Dusty's hand and led him out of the room. They started out as friends, meeting for coffee, spending time together, even studying together for a few weeks. They were sitting in her dorm room, watching TV, and then she decided to take a chance. Dusty, not that it matters to me, but are you gay? I mean, it's cool if you're... She started. I know you said you had a girlfriend back home, but was that just an evasion? What makes you think I'm gay? Dusty interrupted. Intervened Dusty. What's going on, Casey? The woman colored bright red and lowered her eyes. She turned off the TV and sat next to Dusty on the made-up bed. We've been having a pretty good time together for a few weeks now, right? Well, I've never had a guy hang out with me this long without asking me out since I was about 15. I like you, Dusty. I like you a lot, but you haven't made a single move on me. Why not, unless you're gay? Casey said. Dusty smiled radiantly and let out a sigh he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He leaned toward the woman and kissed her firmly on the lips. My apologies. I didn't think someone with your status could be interested in someone like me except as a friend, and I didn't mean to ruin a friendship I hold dear by foolishly asking you out, Dusty said. Damn girl, I'd love to go out with you. You're gorgeous, and so much more. You're definitely not cut out to be a cheerleader. I know most people think of cheerleaders as mindless sluts who have sex with all the athletes, but that's not true for most of us. We are athletes. We train and we work hard, and we support the athletes at our university, Casey stated. I have to admit that before I met you, I thought so too, Dusty admitted, but you're far from blonde. They had sex on the 5th date. He thought of Scotty a few times during the evening in Dusty's bed, but quickly put the image out of his mind, realizing it was disrespectful to both women. 2 hours later, Casey was half lying on top of Dusty with a peaceful smile on her face and her eyes closed. I can't believe I thought you might have been gay and a virgin, she said softly. That was amazing. Someone taught you well. I'd like to think that the man and I have taught each other well. I'm glad you enjoyed it, he replied. At Purdue, they didn't date until after graduation. Dusty's friends were shocked that he was dating a cheerleader, and most of her friends were surprised that she was dating a younger student who many of them thought was nothing special. You could date any stud on campus, any of the top athletes, and you're dating a nerdy engineer, her best friend Becky Frailing once said. I get that he's probably a nice guy and all, and he's cute, but girl, he's not a stud like some guys who are willing to give up a testicle to get you into bed. Oh my God, you have no idea. I'm going to have to kill the first cocky bitch that makes a move on him. By the way, that nerd, as you call him, is a world champion, Casey said. Great guy, smart, loyal, and good in bed. Yeah, who wouldn't want a partner like that? That's right, me too. Dusty became the biggest Boilermaker fan on campus and attended every home athletic event the cheerleading squad played at. She seemed as devoted to him as he was to her. The spring of Casey's senior year, they were at a popular bar near campus when Lucas Miller, the star center on the basketball team, asked Casey to dance. Casey knew Lucas and didn't mind, so she asked Dusty if he would mind. Dusty had no problem granting Casey's request, and she and Lucas went dancing. Both dancers seemed to be enjoying themselves, but when the second song ended, Lucas stopped Casey as she tried to leave the dance floor, grabbed her arm and tried to pull her to him. Watching intently, Dusty rose from his chair in a matter of seconds and approached the couple. You gotta go, kid, said Lucas, who is 6'9" and 250 pounds. The Fox cheerleader will spend the night with me. I don't think so, Lucas, Dusty said to the larger man. You don't think you're going to be taken to the NBA with 2 assaults and possibly a rape charge, do you? Let her go right now or kiss that big contract goodbye. And the ligaments in your left knee at the same time. The dancing stopped, but the jukebox kept playing. Lucas quickly realized that the little man showed no fear, which meant he was just the kind of man who could carry out that threat. The cheerleader was pretty, but not worth the expense, he thought. My bad. No need to drag anyone else into this, he said, removing his hand from Casey's arm. Time to go, beautiful, Dusty said, leading Casey out of the bar. Dusty stayed a few days after his last exam to watch Casey graduate that spring. They had several serious discussions about their future relationship, and by mutual consent, albeit sadly, decided to part on good terms so that Casey could continue her career, and Dusty could finish his last 2 years of high school. Casey's parents flew in for prom from the East Coast, so the couple knew their last night together would be 2 days before the event. After leaving her parents at the hotel, Dusty and Casey spent the night at her apartment, saying an unforgettable goodbye. They slept for several hours before Dusty returned to his room with slightly swollen lips, a small bruise on his cheek, and a wide grin caused by the events of the night. After the graduation ceremony, Dusty went with Casey and her parents to a nice restaurant to have dinner. When the meal was over, the group went outside to leave, and Dusty and Casey said goodbye to them. As Dusty left, Casey quietly said to her mother, "I hope I didn't screw up too badly. That was probably the best son-in-law candidate you've ever seen." Several of Casey's friends had contacted Dusty a few days after classes resumed in the fall. They all knew that he and Casey had officially ended their relationship when she graduated, and they had all told him that they wanted to try dating him because Casey had always praised him for being a good guy and a great lover. Dusty had spent the last 2 years of high school dating, enjoying the charms of several beautiful Purdue students. He was a sought-after commodity, matching Casey's expectations. Unfortunately for him, none of the women were as good as Casey herself. After graduating from college with a 391 GPA and academic honors, Dusty landed what he thought was his dream job. He was hired at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. Dusty had dated several beautiful women in college, and he considered his dating and social life in Houston to be top-notch. Raylene Distillery is a small rum distillery in San Leon Marin, near Galveston Bay. It was the first rum distillery in Texas, and in addition to a large selection of products, including 7 types of rum, they offer tours. Dusty and 3 of his coworkers pulled up to the distillery 5 minutes before the tour started. The neighborhood didn't look good, and their car was the only one in the parking lot. They were already thinking of leaving when 2 more cars pulled up beside them. They changed their minds and got out of the car when 4 more cars pulled up. The tour was informative and fun, and ended at the Buccaneer Bar at the distillery for tastings and drinks. Dusty noticed that there were several women in the group, but didn't pay much attention to them until one of them twisted her ankle in her mid-calf boots and spilled the drink she was carrying onto Dusty's back, falling to the floor. "Erg!" Dusty cried out in shock, but quickly came to his senses when he saw that the woman had fallen to the deck. He jumped up from his chair and examined the red-haired woman lying at his feet. "Are you okay?" he asked, bending down to help her up. It was then that he noticed her eyes, her bright green eyes. The women noticed the look in the handsome young man's eyes. "Do I know you?" she asked, looking into the man's eyes. "Not yet, but soon," he said. "I'm Dusty Dustwitch." Marissa Scott," she said. "So, Miss Scott, can I buy you a new drink?" He smiled brightly. "Yes, you can if you tell me how I know you," she said. A few hours later, Dusty and his friends left the distillery. Dusty left with a bottle of Raylene's Reserve XO rum, the woman's phone number, and a date for the following Saturday night. Dusty awoke to the sensation of another body embracing him, a soft, fragrant female body. His brain instantly regained consciousness, although this wasn't the first time he had woken up with a woman in his bed. It was, however, the first time he had woken up with a green-eyed woman beside him. Unbelievable, he thought. She was still with him in his bed. He ran his hand down her body from shoulder to hip. She corrected her position and rolled over, her face a few inches from his face. He leaned forward and kissed her gently on the lips. "You're still here. It's amazing," he said quietly. The woman smiled at him with her bright green eyes. "Where else would I be? Don't I belong in your bed?" she asked. "Absolutely. Forever," he replied. "Wait here for a second. I'll be right back." Dusty walked over to the desk in his room, opened a drawer, and returned to the bed with a long, thin box in his hands, which he handed to the woman. "I believe it belongs to you," he said. Marissa sat up, opened the box, and discovered a beautiful green necklace. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "Would you do me the honor?" she asked, turning to have Dusty put the necklace on her. "If only you'll allow me one more honor, Marissa Scott. Is it okay if I call you Scotty?" asked Dusty. "I would really, really like that," she said, smiling radiantly.